When it comes to wildfire in California, we've got some big updates to talk about based on what happened over the weekend, and we're also going to dive into the weather forecast for the next few days to see what our fires might be doing in the future. As always, if you're only interested in one of the fires, you can click down in the time bar below to go directly to the fire you want to hear about. With that being said, I'd suggest listening to the next few minutes as I'm going to give a broad overview of the wildfire conditions that affect all of our individual fires. The first thing we'll do is check out the satellite imagery, where you can see California is looking much better than it has, especially when compared with last week and the week before. We obviously do still have these smoky areas right above the August complex, the Creek Fire, and the Castle Fire, but for the most part, California is looking pretty clear right now, which is due to some of the favorable conditions we had over the weekend. Now, when it comes to the conditions over the next few days, there's really three variables that are going to be affecting our wildfires. We talk about this in every video. It's temperature, winds, and humidity. Obviously, the warmer it is, the faster fire will spread. With wind gusts, you get faster fire spread and spotting. And then with humidity, when the air is dry, the vegetation gets dry, and then your fire can spread faster. So those are the three variables we're going to be looking at for all of California over the next few minutes here. When it comes to temperatures, you can see we're still pretty warm right now. We're in the mid to high 90s, especially throughout the valley. But compared to last week, this is actually looking better. I'll remind you, last week we had some areas that were 105, 107 degrees. So it has cooled off about 10 degrees since last Thursday and Friday. And I'm happy to say this cooling trend is going to continue. Tuesday is looking a bit cooler, still warm though, but then Wednesday we really start to see things cool off. We're going to be down into the 80s and low 90s, and that cooling trend is just going to continue throughout the week. As Thursday we might drop into the 70s, and then Friday we're possibly in the 60s in some places, and then Saturday we might even get some rain. I'll talk more about that in a second. So overall temperature this week is looking great. It should just be cooling throughout the next 5 days. When it comes to wind gusts, this is another thing that's looking good. I'll remind you, when some of our fires were going 100,000 acres a day, or the glass fire just blew up and grew 30 to 40,000 acres in one day, we had some 40 to 60 mile per hour wind gusts, even hurricane force gusts in some areas getting up into the 70 mile per hour range. And right now and throughout the next 2 days, wind gusts are looking pretty calm throughout really all of California. I don't really see any places that are going to be above 25 miles per hour. So that's exactly what we want to see over the next 2 days. And I'm happy to say that's going to continue throughout the week. Those weak winds are exactly what we want to see when it comes to wildfire behavior, because honestly, I believe winds are the number one thing that lead to rapid fire spread. So it's good to see they're going to be a lot calmer than they were last week. There is one variable that I am a little bit worried about right now, and it's certainly allowing the August complex to actively grow right now. And unfortunately, the dry air will be continuing throughout the next couple of days. As you see, we get into the single-digit humidity and really not going above 25% even throughout the nighttime hours. So what happens when it's dry even throughout the nighttime hours is it allows our fires to just consistently burn. So while we might not have any rapid spread, we're going to have steady spread as this air stays extremely dry. And I've said this before, when you get dry air, you get dry vegetation, which allows the fire to grow. You can see even 6% on Wednesday. I believe I even saw a 3% on this graph earlier. So dry air the next 3 days. This is the number one thing I'm going to be watching, as this could lead to some fire spread. But like our other variables, there's some good news in the extended forecast. As Wednesday, we're going to get a great push of humid air coming in from the ocean, and we might even reach 100% humidity. If that actually ends up moving in on Wednesday, that is going to significantly calm down all of our fires, especially some of these ones in the north or northern California that are still actively burning right now. So humidity is the thing I am worried about over the next two and a half days. But when it comes to temperature, winds, and the extended humidity forecast, I would say things are looking great and clearly much better than last week. And I teased this earlier in the video, but we might actually see some rain later this week. The exact timing of this is still pretty unconfident in the forecast. It could be Friday, maybe Saturday, maybe not at all. That's why I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this rain event yet. But if you stay tuned in about 2 or 3 days as we get closer to this event and the forecast models get better, then I'll start to focus on this. I kind of have a rule of thumb. I don't trust a forecast more than 3 days out, so I'll mention this. This is certainly going to be something I'm going to be watching throughout this entire week. And I mean, I don't want to get our hopes up, but if this ends up happening and we get a ton of rain, we could possibly be seeing the end of fire season. It would be some great news, so I'm watching this closely and hoping that it happens. When it comes to the air quality, this is what's going on right now. You can see we do have some moderate air throughout most of the state. Again, that area above the August complex, the Creek Fire and the Castle Fire, that's where we do have that unhealthy to even very unhealthy air in some places. Looking at the forecast for later today, should be getting a little bit better, although that unhealthy air does stick around. Oh, that's actually the forecast for tomorrow. So later today, that unhealthy air, pretty similar to what I was just saying, sticks around. And then tomorrow, says just in the North Bay, but I imagine the Castle Fire and Creek Fire will be continuing to grow over the next couple of days with the dry air that we have. So I'd imagine that's going to be still unhealthy too. You can see the South Bay though, finally in that good air quality again, and I can attest to that. I'm in the South Bay right now, and it's one of the nicest days I've seen in weeks. So overall, air quality looking great. Where it's not looking great though is, again, above that August complex, and this is the first fire I want to talk about because this has some huge news based on what happened over the weekend. I'll get to that in a second though. So as we go into the fire perimeter and hotspot map, you can see there's still some active growth with this one. I'll remind you, this shows the fire perimeter, and these red dots show where the fire is actively burning. And the last time I showed this map, it was just burning right here and up in this northern section. And you can actually see some of the spots that previously looked like they were out have actually started back up again. This was due really to that red flag warning we had last Friday with those warm temps, low humidities, gusty winds. It really got this fire going again, and unfortunately it grew over 30,000 acres over the weekend. And as you can see, there are still a large number of spots that appear to still be active. I know with those wind gusts that we had on Friday, spotting was a major problem. That's where the major blaze might be in here, and then the winds pick up a burning ember, toss it elsewhere, start a new little fire. So I know that was a problem with this one, and once we look at the forecast, you'll see there's a lot of dry air remaining in this region, which is allowing this fire to continue to burn. There's already critically dry vegetation, so when you mix that with dry air, it's not what you want if you're trying to put this fire out. Now, the other fire I will mention in this area is the Zogg fire here. And looking at this map, I can't even find one hotspot. So it appears to me that the Zogg fire is completely out, which is amazing because that was one of the most active fires we had throughout last week. If we go to the numbers for the Zogg fire, you can see it's staying around 56,000 acres. That didn't go up very much over the weekend, and it's already at 76% containment. I've been honestly amazed with the effort on this fire. Within only a couple of days, they were already starting to gain some great containment, and you can see that containment trend has continued. So this hopefully will be the last time I even report on the Zogg fire, as it's looking pretty good right now. Now, the one that's not looking good, going back to the August complex, where this is the big news for the video, it is now over 1 million acres. This is now double the size of the second largest wildfire in the history of California. And to put this number into perspective and just show how absolutely massive it is, that right there in one fire is larger than the seasonal average for all of California. So typically in a wildfire season, we'll maybe get 800,000 acres burned. This fire alone has crossed the 1,000,000 acre mark, which has never been done before in California. And unfortunately, that number is going to continue to go up, at least over the next couple days where we still have that dry air. But who knows, once that humidity pushes in and possibly even getting some rain, maybe this growth starts to slow in by the end of the week. So we can take a look at the forecast for this, and wind gust wise, it's actually looking pretty good. Last week we had some 30 mile per hour gusts. You can see we get into the 20s throughout this afternoon, Tuesday afternoon, into the low 20s again, but overall wind gust wise, this one's looking pretty good, much less than we had last week. When it comes to temperatures, we'll go back to today. You can see that's why we do still have some active growth with this one. It's still pretty warm around this fire, into the low 90s. That's about as warm as it was last Friday when a lot of this growth really sparked up again. Looking at Tuesday though, we're starting to see that cooling trend come in, and then just fast forwarding till Saturday, we might be dropping into 50s. So again, I'm really watching that possible rain event moving in Saturday. That would just be amazing if that one holds true. Like I said though, humidity remains a problem. This is why this fire is continuing to grow. Humidity stays extremely low. Luckily, we could be getting into the 30s tonight. That'll certainly help firefighters and fire behavior calm down a little bit. But then we're going to be back into the low teens tomorrow. And then, again, Wednesday, Thursday, still seeing that dry air with this one. So I do expect the August complex to continue to grow. Now the next fire I want to talk about is the glass fire here. And I know I just pointed to this area, but you can't really even see any smoke with this one, which is great news. And if we actually go to the fire perimeter and hotspot map, you can see why there's not that much smoke coming off of this fire anymore. And it's really because there aren't that many hotspots left. You can see there is this one area up to the north here, but this was a big thing we were talking about last week. Actually, two big things we were talking about last week. The first one was the fact that the glass fire here was going to start burning into the LNU fire scar. Now, the importance of that is this LNU fire about a month ago burned out all this vegetation here, or at least a good portion of it. So, as predicted, once the glass fire moved into this fire scar, the fire behavior and these active fires and these hotspots completely disappeared because there was no vegetation to fuel the fire. Where we do still see some growth is up here. That's where those fuels haven't been burned out, and we're still in some steep terrain, so that remains an active region, but based on that satellite imagery, it's not creating all that much smoke, which means there's not all that much burning. Now, over the weekend on Friday evening really, I actually got to deploy to this fire with the San Jose State Fire Weather Research Lab to do some research and get some good data scanning the plume with our mobile radar, and we were right around this area. And this is the second thing that we were talking about last week that ended up playing a big role with this fire, and really our data that we got proved. So around this area, the smoke above us was extremely thick, and what that did was it really provided a protective layer over this area of the fire. With that protective layer of smoke, less sunlight could get in, it was much cooler than the forecasts were showing, and it was much weaker winds. So while this area was expecting to see a ton of growth, that protective layer of smoke really calmed that fire behavior down, and based on how it looks right now, it pretty much looks like that area of the fire is out. So before I get into some of the footage that I took at that fire that we went to on Friday, I just want to go over the history of this fire just to go back in time and see how this fire has progressed. So this is what it looked like on the 28th. You can see it actually started as 2 separate fires, and within 1 day it had already burned a large amount of acreage. There was some 50, 60 mile per hour winds, which really led to some rapid fire growth with this one. By the 29th, you can see there was a just rapid rate of spread, a ton of acreage burned, and then it got close to just combining into one giant fire. You can see on the 30th, we get a little bit of growth in the north here and the south, but the growth appears to have slowed down. Now by the 1st, we continue to see that growth in the north, and you'll notice that it hasn't hit the LNU lightning complex scar. Where you start to see it hit the scar, that's not the most active data for the LNU complex, but you see that extension of the fire start to slow down in that area. Now moving into the 3rd, you can see this fire continues to slow down, a little bit of growth up here, and less growth around this area, starting to see the effects of that protective smoke layer. Now moving into the 4th, again, much slower growth. It's just interesting to look at this fire perimeter when compared with the first 2 days and how much was burning to just that tiny little sliver that we get over a 24-hour period. Now the most recent data on the 5th, basically only burning in that very northern edge. This fire is significantly calmed down, and it's really due to, one, that protective smoke layer and some of the amazing efforts by a lot of our fire personnel. Now, one last thing I want to do with this one is just take a look at how close this fire got to some of these communities in here, because this was a scary fire when it was first starting out. So you can see how close it got to the town of Calistoga, burned right along the edge here, really getting close to some of these populated areas. Now, the other spot I was watching extremely closely was St. Helena down here. As you see, it was coming down the mountains on both sides of St. Helena, really getting close to a lot of these more populated areas. The one other spot that I was watching closely with this one was down as it was starting to move into Santa Rosa, and amazingly, it appears to just stop right as we get into the populated areas and the bottom of these hills. So overall, it's pretty crazy to see how fast this fire grew in the first 2 days, but it's good to see that it never ended up really pushing into these major populated areas, and the growth appears to be calming down. Now, like I said, I did go to this fire on Friday with the San Jose State Fire Weather Research Lab. You can see the plume coming up right there. That was our LiDAR truck, and this is our radar truck, which actually is scanning the plume to see what kind of dynamics are going on with the smoke and with the fire in general. So this was pretty cool to be able to go up there. And one other thing you'll notice in this video, if I press play again, you can see these branches aren't moving at all. The winds were about 0 to 3 miles an hour, and again, it was because of that protective layer of smoke that you can really see is thick over this area. One other video, I know we always talk about the dozers when it comes to the CAL FIRE resources. That is what one of these dozers looks like. And this, you can't really tell how big this is just from this video, but this thing is absolutely massive. It's probably over 10 to 12 feet tall, and then you can see the fire burning off in the distance there, some of the orange glow coming up on the other side of that ridge line right there. Overall, in this area, the fire behavior was relatively calm, but we did see some torching where an entire tree would start burning. Where some of the more active fire behavior was with this one was, again, on this northern side. That's the only real area with this fire that's continuing to see fire growth. Now, when it comes to, that is not what we're talking about. Sorry, I have about 40 tabs open right now. We're going to first look at the Wharf S-Fire forecast for what this fire could be doing over the next 2 days. And you can see much slower growth than this model was showing in the past. In the past, it had this entire eastern side just blowing up right here, same as the southern side, and it doesn't have much growth showing in this area any longer. It does still have some growth showing in this northern area here, but one thing I will say is this model doesn't take into account the fact that the LNU fire burned out a bunch of this vegetation. So while this fire shows that these southerly winds will be leading to some fire growth, I think this fire is just about wrapped up, as the only area where we do still have some growth is where the fire has been burned out in the past, or the vegetation is burned out in the past. So this one did grow over the weekend. That northern area, like I said, was active, burned about 5,000 acres over the weekend. We're up to 65,000 acres with this one, but we are at 30% containment, so that's good to see there. Again, don't take my word for it when I say a wildfire is looking good. Always be sure to check the most recent evacuations. Now, this is some bad news with this one. When it comes to the damages and losses, that number is way up from the last time we looked at it. We now have over 1,200 structures destroyed associated with the glass fire. Now, I was just talking about some of the personnel and resources. We've got over 2,700 personnel still on this fire, 27 crews, 21 helicopters, 408 engines, 58 dozers, and 49 water tenders. That's one of the dozers that I got to see on Friday. Now, when it comes to this personnel, you can see we almost have 3,000 still on this fire, and like I said, that northern section really appears to be the only spot that's still burning, so they're just going to be able to attack this last burning spot with just a ton of resources. So I'm starting to feel better about the glass fire. Now, I'm also starting to feel better because of the forecast. You can see temperatures are way down from what they were last week. Last week, we were in the triple digits. We're down about 10 degrees the next 2 days, and then seeing a big cool down later in the week. And like I said, slight chance of rain. Not going to get too into that yet, as it is pretty far out in the forecast. Now, as with all our fires, the one thing I am still a little worried about is that dry air that remains over California through Tuesday and part of Wednesday. As we're still in the teens, that will still lead to some fire spread. But again, temperatures and winds looking much better in this area. Now, the next fires I want to talk about are the Castle Fire and the Creek Fire here. As you can see, these are still extremely active. A ton of smoke coming off the Creek Fire here, and really Castle Fire too. That's what's creating some of the poor air quality that we're seeing in this area. So if we back out here and go down to check out, one thing I will say, I believe the CZU, SCU, and LNU lightning complex wildfires that really started this wildfire season about a month and a half ago, those appear to be at 100% containment, which is just great news. So clicking out of there, looking at the Castle Fire, you can see this one is still fairly active. As you saw on the satellite map with all that smoke, lots of hot spots on this northern section here, and even some new hot spots that we weren't seeing towards the end of last week. It'll be interesting to see if these two fires connect over the next few days. But again, that southern edge, which was our top priority as it was closer to some of the higher populated areas, southern edge remains quiet with this one. Now, when it comes to the numbers for the Castle Fire or the Sequoia Complex, it's at 158,000 acres, but it is at 65% containment. Now, if we scroll up here and go to the Creek Fire, you can see this one is still extremely active. This started about 2 to 3 weeks ago, and it really just will not quit. And it seems to be the exact same areas that continue to burn, this western section here, the northern section here, and this eastern finger. Now, there's a few reasons for this continued growth. I would say the big two are, one, there's a lot of critically dry fuels in this area, a lot of trees that have been killed by bark beetle, so there's a lot of fuel in this area. The other thing, it's in some steep terrain, so that can lead to some faster fire spread. But there's two things that have reduced some of the fire spread. Now, one, as it burns farther north and farther east, it's getting into some rockier terrain. Rockier terrain means less vegetation, which means less fuel for the fire. There's also less fuel for this fire because this is where we actually had a fire in the past. And let's see if I can find the map for this one. Yeah, you can see the Lions Fire right on the northern section here, right where we see calmer fire behavior. So just like with the glass fire, it's interesting to see how a previous fire really helps out when it comes to current fire behavior. You can see that perimeter basically stops where those fuels have been burned out in the past. Just an amazing illustration of really how the California ecosystem is supposed to work. Now, you can see, based on these red lines, that is showing where it is still uncontained. So there's still some work to do on this fire, and I unfortunately do expect it to continue to keep growing. When it comes to the Creek Fire, we're at 322,000 acres. This did burn about 11,000 acres over the weekend, so this was one of our more active fires. And you can see containment still below 50%, so I'm going to be watching this one over the next few days as conditions are similar to what they were last week, at least over the next 2 days, as we're still in the mid to high 80s. Now, some good news towards the end of the week, we're going to be getting hopefully into the 70s and possibly some rain. Now, don't get too excited yet. That is in the extended forecast. As with all our fires, really the only thing I'm worried about right now is that dry air, because when you mix that dry air with all the fuels that are already dead and dry, that's what's allowing this fire to continue. And you can see it's dry 24 hours a day for at least the next 2 days. So unfortunately, I expect the growth with the Creek Fire to continue, although in the extended forecast, we're going to be having a big cool down, hopefully get some good humidity in here, and hopefully start to see this fire calm down and be put to bed. Now, the next fire I want to talk about is the North Complex up here, and I'm pointing to a very broad area because there's really no smoke to point at, which is great news because this is actually a fire that started seeing some more active growth towards midweek last week. We started seeing a lot of growth, especially in this northern section here, and it was starting to jump Highway 70. As you can see now, though, there's maybe 2 or 3 hotspots remaining on this northern section, much calmer than it was appearing towards Friday. And I'll remind you, there was some tricky conditions last week. We had triple-digit temperatures, some extreme wind gusts, so to have only this one little area burning right now is some great news when it comes to the North Complex. Now, when it comes to the numbers for the North Complex, we're at 318,000 acres. This only grew 2,000 acres over the weekend. And as you can see, we're up to 83% containment. Awesome to see that number as high as it is. You can actually see where that containment is basically everywhere except this northwestern section. And as the fire behavior in this area appeared extremely calm, or I shouldn't say extremely, it just appeared calm, much less hot spots than in the past, and our conditions are looking better over the next few days, so I'm expecting we're going to start seeing some great containment and hopefully putting this fire to bed by the end of this week. Now, looking at the forecast for this area, it is still warm over the next 3 days, so if we do see a flare-up in this fire again, it will most likely happen possibly Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, but then as we push into Thursday and Friday, there's going to be a big cool down and possibly some rain. So, like I said, tomorrow could be a little tricky for this fire. We're still in the 90s, humidity down into the teens, but if I had to guess with this one, I'd say we're looking good. I'm not expecting another big flare-up with this one. When we had that big flare-up last week, we had hurricane-force wind gusts in this area. It was 70 miles per hour in some areas, and we're just not going to see that this week. Winds will be much calmer, and I don't really see this one blowing up again. So that's, I would say, some good news there. Now, another fire that did see some activity over this weekend was the Bobcat Fire down in Southern California. And I'm glad to say you can't really see any smoke coming off of it right now, but this did have some active behavior, even though I didn't even give a forecast on it on Friday because I thought it was done. On Friday morning, it didn't appear there was any hotspots left. seemed like this fire was completely out. And then this area around Mount Wilson actually flared up on Friday and into Saturday. There was a bunch of smoke coming off this area. Clicking in here now, though, you see a lot of those hot spots have disappeared, significantly calmed down. So hopefully I don't jinx it again in saying I believe the Bobcat Fire is nothing really to worry about in the future. Now, when this did flare up, we had triple-digit temperatures, wind gusts into the 30 to 40 mile per hour range, humidities in the single digits. So there was really extreme weather conditions. That's what allowed this thing to start up again. But I'm glad to say we're looking good now and in the extended forecast. So the Bobcat is up to almost 116,000 acres. This did grow 2,000 over the weekend. 2,000 isn't all that much, but I did just want to mention it because it's more than I expected to see. Like I said though, forecast is looking much better over the next 5 days, so I'm hoping we don't see another flare-up. When it comes to the wildfire season in general, I've said this before, this has been by far the worst wildfire season in the history of California. We've had over 4 million acres burned now, which is double the previous record. And another thing that's double the previous record is the largest wildfire in California history. The August complex officially is over 1 million acres, making it twice the size of the next largest fire. So like I said, SCU and LNU appear to be 100% contained. We don't have to worry about those officially anymore. With the August, Creek and North, we could still see some growth, and most likely with the August and Creek, North is looking a little better. I will continue to watch the August and Creek closely, as the dry air could lead to some more growth over the next 2 days. But I will say, stay tuned, because if that rain event pans out over this weekend, hopefully wildfire season will be coming to an end. Cross your fingers, it's wishful thinking. As always, thank you to CAL FIRE and the U.S. Forest Service for all the amazing work you do. Thank you to San Jose State and Dr. Craig Clements for teaching me everything I know about wildfire. And if you or any of your friends or family have been affected by these wildfires, my thoughts and prayers go out to you, and thanks for watching.